Well, I went to college in New York State and came to Luzerne County in the late 70s. And as I had just graduated from architecture school, I attended Cornell, where I studied civil engineering, and I received a master's in business, so a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and master's in business. And then worked for a little bit, and then attended Columbia University and received a master's of architecture. Upon graduating, I came to Wilkes-Barre and went to work with Peter Bolin. And after being licensed, I formed my own firm in the early 80s. And that firm has evolved into Williams Kinsman Lewis Architecture. We're on the corner of South Main and Northampton Street near the new theater project. And there are 10 of us that work together. And my partners and my family are supporting my efforts to be elected to the county council.
Okay. And what is your motivation for entering the race? When did you make that decision, and how did you go about it?
Well, when the voters approved the home rule in November 2010, I thought many people would offer to serve, that the new 11-person council provided opportunities for people to serve who hadn't been in county government. And I went around to people who I thought had the experience and the skills and asked them if they'd be interested in serving, to serve a term or two, vote their conscience, and someone would serve after them. And people often ask me, well, why aren't you doing it? And I explained I was running a business, and I had community service obligations, and I was raising a family, and basically the same reasons they had. And I happened to ask one fellow twice. And he, with a certain firmness in his voice, but with some clarity, wagged his finger at me and said, you should not be asking people to do that which you would not be willing to do yourself. And I thought about it and discussed it with my family and my business partners and decided to run. And so that was really in January 2011. And as I thought about it, I thought that the two-party system has not been working particularly well either at any level. It clearly isn't working in Washington. And at the county level, there are no differences between Democratic and Republican policies for courts, wills, deeds, human services, parks, clean water, flood protection. And that really people cooperating, working together, solve problems, not party politics. So I am running as an independent, to make that point, that my hope is that the new council comes together as cooperative people who sit down and listen, analyze, ask for the information, discuss things, listen to the voters, listen to themselves, and then vote their conscience. And that really independent-minded people working together can solve the problems of government, not party politics.
And I want to back up just one more step. Why did you take it upon yourself to start to approach these people? Because a lot of people were concerned one way or the other, pro or con, about home rule charters, but they didn't necessarily start to try to recruit candidates for the office.
Well, I've followed government since for a long, long time. You know, mostly government rather than politics. But I've followed county government and have been interested in it. I read lots of newspapers and have always been opinionated. I've always voted. It just seemed like a reasonable thing. The three-commissioner system does not really, that builds in two from one party and one from a minority party, right away builds in an adversarial relationship. So and there were full-time jobs with both executive and legislative powers. All of a sudden, the new form of government provides for a clear county manager as the executive and this council as a legislative body. So it just provided opportunities for people who had not been part of the system to participate, much like they serve on the boards of churches or local community organizations, that they could now participate in government.
Were you supportive of the home rule charter?
Yes.
Do you have concerns about the charter as it exists now, things that you think are going to need to be addressed?
Yes. They're minor refinements, but there are sections of it that refer, particularly in appointments to the Board of Elections, that require that the first appointee be from the party of the governor and the second appointee be from the other major party, rather than saying the appointees need to be from different parties. There are certain portions of county government that as an independent I will not be able to participate. So there are minor refinements like that. The beauty is that because it is home rule and the enabling legislation provides after 5 years that through a process the voters can approve changes to the home rule charter. So we, for the first time in our history as a county, have some control over the way we govern ourselves. And that's really one of the exciting things about this new form of government.
So after some early attempts at recruitment, then you decide you're going to be the person, the candidate. You need to do some gathering of signatures at that point.
Yes.
Is that a difficult process?
The requirement was just under 1,000 signatures, and the common thought was you needed to have more than that to avoid, because not all were exactly as they needed to be. So, but that process, it was a rigorous process. It was lengthy, but it became part of my campaign. I met lots of people and heard lots of thoughts. And while it was work, it was pretty pleasant. The whole process so far has been pretty pleasant, actually.
And you gathered some 1,600 signatures?
1,600 signatures, yes.
Okay.
How did you go about that?
I always had a petition with me. I asked friends to gather signatures, and everywhere I went, I would ask people if they're registered Luzerne County voters. And so it was a constant process. There were many supporters who took petitions, and they also gathered signatures. So it was an effort, but it worked.
What have you been doing to prepare for the job in terms of trying to become more familiar with how county government operates, become more familiar with the charter, those types of things?
Well, you read the documents, you search the Luzerne County website for the financial statements. I've attended both the transition committee meetings as well as the subcommittee meetings to just understand what the issues are as the ethics code, the administrative code, the personnel codes are drafted, as the direction is taken for the boards, authorities, and commissions. There's a subcommittee that deals with that. There's a subcommittee that has drafted the job descriptions. So it is at those meetings where the 11-person transition committee and others are doing the hard work of providing for this transition and putting those documents in place that are going to be needed by the new government.
Are you getting to all or most of those transition committees?
Most of those,
Okay.
but not all of them.
Given
Excuse me, that's inappropriate.
That's quite all right. Happens to all of us.
Yeah, thank you.
Based on your experience at those transition committee meetings, do you feel that it's on pace to take care of its responsibilities by January of next year, or do you have concerns about that whole transition?
Well, they're doing great work. I mean, and it is full of gray areas and lots of issues, and they're working hard, and I have no doubt of the intentions of that group. And I appreciate what they're doing. There are some decisions that I think might have been different. The primary one has to do with advertising for the county manager, and particularly the matter concerning whether or not the applications would be maintained confidential or not. And I have recently penned a letter to the editors, which I have forwarded to the Times Leader, stating an idea that I have that might reopen that process.
So in short, your concern with the process as it is now is?
May not provide for attracting the best possible qualified candidate for county manager. And I think that's a very, very important part of the transition.
If elected, how much time would you expect to dedicate to the county post?
Well, it is a part-time position with 2 meetings a month, but I would imagine that there will be subcommittees as well as understanding the documents that are generated. But I'll bet initially it's fairly intense. I could imagine it being 30 hours a week, I'll bet, would not surprise me.
And do you think it's appropriate for those council members to have a daily presence or a weekly presence in the courthouse, or would you have another preferred method of allowing county workers and the public to get a hold of you?
Well, I think that there should be a mechanism through, the county council will have a clerk who will act as a gatekeeper or an administrator of the council. So I would expect that clerk would be the conduit for communications and that probably every council member would have a mail box and an email address. And I would think there would be mechanisms for voters to, or for citizens to communicate with council members. I don't believe, one of the concerns is that the council members will consider themselves managers of county employees, and that would be inappropriate, that we will, as a council, empower the manager to manage the affairs. And so the actual communications between the council and the staff, the employees of the county, need to go through the manager.
If elected and you're serving on the council, would you vote to approve the hiring of a relative to a county authority, board, or a commission?
No.
And I apologize, these are questions that maybe we would not have asked 4 years ago, and I don't know them. Have you ever been convicted of crime?
No.
Outside of your architecture firm, do you own any businesses? Do you operate any businesses?
I'm a partial owner of a real estate firm, King Rail Projects. It does not currently own any real estate. And my architecture partners and I have a real estate firm that owns the building where we practice architecture.
Okay. Privately, do you own any rental units or anything?
No.
While I'm on the subject of real estate, let's talk about the reassessment. That was an issue that there were no easy answers. There were people on all sides of that issue. What do you feel is an appropriate way to handle reassessment in the future? Is it something we need to revisit periodically, and if so, how often do you think might be the appropriate time?
I think it needs to be revisited regularly, out of fairness. I think that it was a good process. I'm sure there are individual cases where things might not have gone as smoothly or as fairly as one would hope, but overall, I think reassessment is a good idea, and it should be periodic. I realize there is a cost to doing that, and so balancing the frequency of reassessment with the cost is an analysis that would be appropriate, but I think in principle, periodic reassessment is a good idea.
Do you have a skill or an area of expertise that you feel you would bring to council, whether it be numbers and budgeting, a legal background, love of research, experience in contract negotiations, others that you think would be appropriate for this body?
Well, I mean, the field of architecture and running a business has all those issues of managing people and balancing budgets. Architecture in itself is a complex process, and I believe I have the skills to gather information, analyze information, to work with others with many points of view, to find common solutions, and to make tough decisions. Architecture is, it's tough to, actually it's easy to design good buildings. It's tough to get them built. And the many forces that come to bear on complex projects are similar to the many forces that come to bear on governmental issues. So I think my ability to analyze, collaborate, cooperate, negotiate, compromise with others is a skill and experience that would probably serve me well and the county well on the council.
And do you have other characteristics, other attributes that you think would be particularly helpful as a member of that group?
Well, I have a master's of business. I understand reading financial statements. I understand marketplace, and I understand salaries and compensation and health care plans and pension plans, the kinds of nuts and bolts. I understand debt, refinancing. I'm very much aware of financial reports. I'm aware that right now our county, the most recent financial report that's available on the Luzerne County website is for the fiscal year ending December 2009. So we are 20 months from the end of that fiscal year, and we have not yet seen the fiscal report for 2010, which is indicative of some issues surrounding our county's finances. And I think that just being able to sort through those documents is a task in itself. And while they're very complex, I believe I have the skills to sort that out, but that's a tall order.
Okay. On that subject, let's talk a little bit about that, because creating a budget that's going to be workable is going to be one of the biggest challenges for this new group. If you're a part of it, do you have specific ideas for areas in the county that you think there can be some savings? On the flip side of that, do you think there are areas where the county is missing out on potential revenues?
Well, we clearly need to be frugal on the short term. We have 6 collective bargaining agreements that all expire at different points in time. I think that it would be wise for there to be a collaboration and a partnership among the various unions in the county so that there is uniformity to those collective bargaining agreements. And perhaps the mechanism is that the uniformity kicks in when the 6th one is renewed so that there's fairness to all the employees. I think full-time employment to me means 40 hours a week, and I think with that comes the benefit of good morale, good services to the taxpayers and citizens. So I think there are areas for exploration to make the county more efficient. On the long-term basis, really, and to have the $320 million in principal debt and the $150 million in interest that we're going to pay between now and 2027, that to address that, it needs to be a long-term vision of excellence in the county that attracts people, tourists, students, visitors, residents, and businesses, and retains them, and partners with our educational institutions so that our workforce is even more qualified than it is now. And by increasing the population and businesses, we increase the tax base, and that with that we have the opportunity to increase revenue, not increasing taxes and fees. Does that make sense?
Certainly, but when you say over the long term, over the term of a council member's term in office, or what kind of term?
Well, I think it's a, excuse me, yes, go ahead.
It sounds almost pie in the sky. Like, if we could have done that, wouldn't we have done that as a county 20 years ago?
You would have hoped, but I think there are incremental steps. I've always been an advocate for passenger rail service. And our redevelopment authority has not been able to partner with Monroe and Lackawanna County in the regional rail authority. We have a wonderful river. We have sewage overflows that go into it. If we were to work towards clean water, if we maintained good bike paths and had a tourist attraction here so that our quality of life is even better than it is now, if we were to have a common land development and zoning ordinances that was available to the many boroughs, townships, and cities that are in the council, that business would find it easier to go through those processes. That's not to say that each of those boroughs, townships, and cities wouldn't have their own zoning hearing boards or their own planning commissions, but the documents that are used by the design professionals and the business and people who need those documents would find uniformity. So those are things that probably aren't going to happen in the first year or maybe the first 3 or 4 years of the new government. But to begin to think about those things leads to excellence. Maybe 5 or 10 or 20 years. We probably won't have passenger rail service here for 15 or 20 years. But if we don't start now, we won't ever have it.
And I think I know your answer to this one, but I better ask it anyway. What do you feel is the county's responsibility in funding outside organizations, things such as public libraries, or as you mentioned, maybe recreational facilities, trails, parks, etc.?
Well, those that the county owns need to be funded. And I think to the extent that there is discretionary resources available, support of good community service organizations would be appropriate. We're in an unusual time. I hope this is an unusual time. And so it out of just frugality and stewardship of the taxpayers' resources, those designations to those institutions that are good institutions but are not essential to the operation of the county need to be analyzed very, very carefully.
So the libraries would fall under that?
I'm afraid they would. The truth of the matter is they would. And I love our libraries. I think everyone does. And we'll do everything to maintain them, but at the same time, it can't be at the cost of extracting more revenue from senior citizens or taxpayers that isn't fairness. They too are being stressed. So it's a balancing act. And I think that's the beauty of the political process. to have those discussions and to analyze the data rather than making blanket statements. You know, what are the requests? What are the available funds? What are the costs of funding those needy and honorable organizations?
If elected, would you want to bring a particular issue to the council? Is there something that you feel passionate about that you think isn't being discussed? I've heard other candidates talk about natural gas issues, taxation issues. Or do you feel it's, as a council person, your job to wait for the manager to bring issues to the council?
Well, I don't think we need to wait for the manager to bring issues, but clearly in terms of operation, the manager is very important. But I think we have this fundamental opportunity to change the way we govern ourselves, not just by the structure, but we can change the way we interact as elected officials by having independent-minded people who are absolutely independent from the other, in this case, 10 members of council, so that there are no blocks, there are no group. For any particular issue, the vote may go one way, and on another issue, a completely different group of people might be in the majority of the vote. So that idea of people listening, which I think is a new phenomena, analyzing real data, asking for information, discussing it, taking public input, and then voting their conscience without regard to re-election or a constituency that they are responsible for, to really make decisions in their judgment, in the best interest of the county, the future of the county, and not their re-election or their friends or family or constituents that are less than all the voters or all the citizens of Luzerne County. I'm amazed that that's even a novel idea.
Some of the people running have not isolated themselves in that way. They've sort of formed teams and so forth. How do you feel about that?
But the groups that have formed teams, I'm wary of that. I'm skeptical. I don't think that's the basis for good public service. They may represent their small constituency well and advocate for them, but that's not what they're being elected for. We're at-large members representing all the citizens of the county and the future of the county. It isn't just everybody who's here now, but it's everybody who's yet to come.
If you're elected to the group, would you be interested in serving as its chair? And if not, what qualities would you be looking for in a chairperson?
Well, I have great respect for Jim Bobeck, who is serving as the chair of the Transition Committee. He, to me, is a model of how a chair should run a meeting. He's fair and clear and knowledgeable, and at the same time firm. I have no particular desire to serve as chair. If for some reason that were a need that the council identified, I would sure consider it, but I have no aspirations to be chair at this point. But I think there are others who might serve well.
And obviously, in this area, there's always a certain level of media interest in county operations. We think that's going to be amplified significantly at the start of next year because of this new group, among other reasons. If you're part of the council, what do you think is the appropriate way for it to communicate, not just with the Times Leader, but with all the news outlets? Do you think it's appropriate to have some sort of designated spokesperson? Or do you think all the council members should be communicating with the media?
Well, I would hope, I think individual council members should be free to communicate with the press. I see no reason that they should gag themselves, or at the same time, I think that on a particular issue, or that it may make sense for someone to be designated to address the press on behalf of the council. But no, I see no reason for any restrictions. I would hope that meetings would be wide open. I can imagine executive sessions for personnel matters or legal matters where there's litigation involved, but I would hope those would be very rare.
Any questions from the group at this point? Does anyone have anything? A couple campaign questions. We're asking the candidates, do you know about approximately what you might spend for this campaign? Do you have a dollar amount?
I'm absolutely amazed at the contributions I've received. I mean, it's a problem. It's a delightful problem. I had no idea. I had one campaign party which I did not charge a ticket fee but accepted contributions, and it exceeded my expectations. My guess is that I might spend $20,000, which is far more than I ever imagined, but the resources have been contributed to my campaign, and I will spend them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have a limit that you place on the amount of a donation that you'll accept?
No.
May I ask what the largest amount has been so far?
Yes, I received a very generous contribution from my sister in Idaho, who donated $7,000 to my campaign.
And how do you anticipate using some of that? Is that going to be radio and TV?
I've purchased yard signs and buttons and stickers and cards, and I do expect to produce a television commercial.
Is someone managing your campaign?
Phil Decker is the chair of my committee, and I have a committee of good friends who are working with me. Ellen Smith is the treasurer of my committee.
Bear Creek, Ellen Smith?
Yes, from Bear Creek.
And I think Sue Colasar is working.
Sue Colasar has been providing media support and advice, and she's producing the television commercial.
We asked her when we met Lisa Galvin, she told us who else who she was working with.
Any other questions from the group? Are you satisfied with this endorsement meeting? Do you feel we've asked the appropriate questions and you've had a chance to answer?
Yes, I think when I think about the most important immediate functions of the council, I think clearly this county manager is very important. I think developing an open and transparent process for making appointments to the boards, authorities, and commissions. I think establishing a culture of cooperation and listening, so that becomes the standard for the council. In this notion that really we do have this very unique opportunity to get it started on a good foundation. And the fourth one is the budget and understanding finances, both the debt, the budget, the reporting and accounting system, understanding the finances of all those boards, authorities, and commissions. There's a lot of confusion and complexity around the financial systems, and I hope that can be simplified so the reports can be timely and available to the public and readable. Right now, that's not the case.
Anything that we did not ask you about that you particularly want to mention? Anything that you want to emphasize?
What I often say when I speak to others, and that is that I have no axe to grind, I have no hunger for power, and I have no party to serve. I'm just interested in starting the new county government on a good foundation.